Hello people, today I want to talk to you about a very challenging topic, gun rights, which of course is related to firearms violence in the United States, a phenomenon that we call mass shootings. What I want to talk about is what the Constitution actually says about firearms and possession of firearms. And I want to point out that the problem we have with the firearms is not so much a technical or legal problem. It's really has something to do with our national character, what kind of psychological and social problems Americans might have because we're Americans. Anyway, here we go with what the Constitution actually says. First and most important is the original Constitution before the Bill of Rights was added, the first 10 amendments. Described in Article 1, Section 8, a long list of the powers of Congress. And here's one of them. To provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states respectively the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. That gave the Congress, the national legislature of the new United States, a great deal of control over state militias because they could prescribe how they're trained, even though the states would have the authority to train them. And it says they could provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia. Very interesting. Provide for. That means the national government's going to be involved in organizing the militia, including state militias, going to be involved in arming them, and going to be involved in disciplining them. That's what the original Constitution says, and that has always been there. Now, when the Constitution was first presented to the states for ratification, they noticed something was missing. Where are our civil rights? Europe, especially England, had gone through a long and painful history of asserting what we today call civil rights and human rights. Free speech, right to a trial. So, the 10 amendments were added. That's our Bill of Rights. And one of those Bill of Rights is the Second Amendment. And this is what the Second Amendment actually says. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, in European history, there were occasionally disputes as to who had the right or the authority to raise an army and to be in possession, have men in possession of weapons of war. And those medieval weapons of war did not include firearms until late in our, what we call the Middle Ages. And of course, they were very primitive firearms. But before firearms, the primary weapons of war were things like lances, pickaxe, battle axe, bow and arrow, crossbow, mace, clubs, and if you look it up online, you see they were pretty good at devising weapons before the firearms came into our society to help us defend ourselves and kill one another. Anyway, at the time that the Constitution was ratified in 1790, between 1787 and 1790, a firearm meant either a pistol, a handgun, or a musket, a rifle, that took about 30 seconds to reload by the fastest reloaders. Most people would take even longer than 30 seconds, possibly an entire minute. required a patch, powder, ball, and a ramrod to push it down into the barrel. The bullet or cartridge, as we know it, was not invented till around 1845, the repeating rifle not until 1860. So, a person cannot reasonably and convincingly argue that the original intent of the Second Amendment is that every citizen own a repeating rifle, and certainly not an assault weapon or a machine gun. Certainly not any rifle that, fires rapidly as fast as you can pull the trigger. Because they didn't exist until 1860, 70 years after the Constitution was ratified. Is it reasonable to call into question the right to bear arms? No, not at all, because every household, except maybe a few households who lived in the business district of cities, I'd say 70 to 80% of American households at the time of the 1790s and even throughout the early 1800s, everybody owned a rifle because you needed it to hunt, to feed yourself. There's plenty of game. Turkeys, birds, deer, and a lot of other animals that were eaten at that time. So the right to own a rifle was assumed and accepted as much as the right to own a wagon or own a horse or own a stew pot or own a knife. If anybody tried to argue in 1820 that you don't have a right to own a rifle, they would think you were some kind of a nutcase. So anyway, we can agree that every citizen has a right to own a firearm in order to defend themselves, their person, and their household, their home. But the question is, does every citizen have a right to own an assault weapon, a weapon that is designed for use on the battlefield in a war, a weapon of combat, a weapon of war? There is a very reasonable argument that that is not what is intended by the Second Amendment. And we have to deal with that. We have to do something about that. I think the best solution to this problem of gun violence is to have guns regulated in a very specific way, a very precise, detailed way. First and foremost, the Congress has the power and should exercise that power to make a distinction between a weapon of self-defense, a firearm that is to defend your person and your home in the case of an invasion or an attack, an assault. That might include a handgun, might include a rifle. But not an assault weapon, not a weapon designed for battlefield use, for combat, designed to kill as many people as you can, as quickly as you can. You don't need that. That's for the militia. And according to what Article 1, Section 8 says, and the Second Amendment, certainly the most likely reasonable interpretation of these provisions is that if an individual, citizen of a state, is going to own an assault weapon, a combat weapon, then that person has to be a member of the militia. They have to be certified or registered, a member of the state militia. And that member of the state militia needs to be disciplined. And the Congress has the power to prescribe that discipline. So the Congress has the power to pass laws that describe in detail the qualifications that a man or woman must possess: physical, mental, psychological, emotional. Congress can prescribe those qualifications before you can be in possession of a combat weapon or a battleground weapon. We can do that. And that is the solution that I think makes the most sense. It won't necessarily protect us from gun violence, because the gun violence does not arise and occur only because of what the law says. It has something to do with the way we think. So it's a tough problem, but I hope I've clarified what the Constitution actually says, and I hope I have clarified that the Congress has all the power it could possibly need to exercise control over firearms. They just have to have the political balls to do it. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.